Write hard and clear about what hurts. Ernest Hemingway. This is AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Szymanski. Today, our guest is Danielle, whose lessons in verse will compel. With pages in tow on the book chatting show, settle in for the tales she will tell. Here's Danielle with a luminous grin. How are you doing?
I love that. Oh my goodness. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm doing
Have you
extremely
been?
well. No
So have
one's
you ever
ever
been
written me a poem
introduced?
like that before.
It's,
No.
it's an introduction in limerick form, as best as I and ChatGPT could come up with.
See, there is a poet hidden inside you, Jacob Szymanski. I think it's about time you get to work.
Last time you were on the show, Danielle, we talked about poetry, and we talked about poetry more off air, and we decided no, we need to do this again. But little note, we got an email from a listener after they listened to that first episode where you came out to talk about poetry. She said, "I'm not a poetry fan, but all the same, I really enjoyed this show. I always listen when I'm out walking, but I usually stop the podcast when I reach home. But tonight I kept on going so as to finish listening. Good job, bon travail." That's from Camille Savoie.
Oh,
Um,
how
yeah,
lovely.
it's a nice
Well,
little note.
shout out to her. How nice of her.
So Danielle, last time around, I pondered out loud what exactly makes a body of text a poem, and it turns out there's somewhat of an academic answer to this.
I'm sorry to say that there's almost always an academic answer to every question. But here's the nice thing: you don't have to agree with it. So, um, you know, I- English, the language that we're talking in today, is very rich in forms of poetry. Not all languages have as many forms as English has, but um,
Huh.
some people have divided poetry into three basic forms: so narrative, dramatic, and lyric. And within these categories, there are four basics that identify a piece of writing as a poem. And they are meter, rhyme, scheme, and stanza. And you don't actually need any of them to write a great poem. But if you see a piece of writing that you can identify as having meter, rhyme, scheme, and stanza, you can be pretty confident it is a poem. But, sometimes you might I don't know if you've ever heard of found poetry. Some people will walk down the street and they'll take bits of text that appear on signposts or appear on advertising, or that they've just encountered for all sorts of untoward reasons. Put it together and it becomes a poem. So
Huh.
and because they identify this as a poem, it's a poem. I don't really like that much structure, to force words into that much structure. I think if you want to use that kind of structure, you should be doing that. But if
So
you
not a
don't,
fan of limericks, is what you're saying.
oh, I love limericks. Are
What
you
about haiku?
kidding
Well,
me?
that's as structured as you can get,
Well,
right? There's like a
exactly.
very
I'm
clear rhyme scheme, very clear rhythm.
absolutely, and I'm just
Mm,
saying that it isn't the
okay.
only thing. That's all.
Okay. Now, if when you're talking about found poetry, I'm assuming that in those cases it wouldn't have any of those four elements you mentioned earlier. Meter, stand. Well, what were the four elements again?
The 4 elements are
Mm.
meter, rhyme, as you know, not every poem rhymes, scheme, and stanza.
Okay.
And there are some very beautiful poems that have all those things, and some of the things that we have identified, as being great poetry, have many of those elements, but not all of them.
What are
And
those elements? Like,
the
can we go through them one by one?
one by one. So
Mhm.
meter is the you can it has a beat, basically, right? It's so
Mm.
so that you can hear, almost like in music, you can hear a beat to it, and you know what rhyme is, right? You know
Yes, of
how,
course. Yeah, yeah.
so yeah,
Mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
especially a fan of
Pretty
limericks
straightforward.
like you, right? A scheme basically says it knows where it's going. It might tell a story, or it might describe an image, or it might have might even have a purpose. It might be political, it might be religious, it might have some other feature that the poet has crafted. Um,
Hmm.
and stanza means that it's generally broken into um, sections, each section being a stanza.
Like a paragraph?
Like a paragraph, yeah,
Hmm.
like a paragraph, only it doesn't necessarily subscribe to the same elements that a prose paragraph has, so it might or might not
Oh,
have punctuation. It might or might not, end a thought, so it's possible that you have a stanza that continues in the next stanza, in a different form or in a different, um that has a different function. But if you look at poetry and you listen to poetry, you can usually hear the breaks. The breaks are the stanzas.
okay, okay, okay. And we talked about iambic pentameter.
We did.
Iambic pentameter last week, and I'm assuming that's what meter is, or at least
That's
that's
right. That's
adjacent to meter. Although I didn't quite understand what iambic pentameter was precisely.
okay.
Can you try
So
and flesh
yeah.
that out for me? Because I
So
know it's super important, especially in Shakespeare.
for Shakespeare particularly, yeah. So an I am means two. So it's da dum. Da dum. That's an I am. Pentameter means there's five of them.
Oh,
So da dum da dum da dum da dum da dum. Uh, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Da-dum, 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 da-dum,
oh,
right? So that's
oh. Okay, that makes so much sense. Okay, okay, okay,
yeah,
okay, okay. Now I see it.
okay, yeah. So that's iambic pentameter. Each line consists of 10 syllables arranged in 5 pairs of unstressed and stressed. So da-dum, the stress comes on the second syllable in that case. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Da-dum, 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 da-dum. So that's iambic pentameter. And English kind of falls neatly into iams. We speak this way, and if you listen to a recording of yourself, you'll probably find, hey, some of this time I'm speaking in iambic pentameter.
And you see that doesn't apply to other languages. Like
No,
English
other languages have
naturally
different.
fits into iambic
That's
pentameter.
right. Or maybe iambic pentameter naturally fits to English. But if you were to ask somebody who speaks another language and knows the poetry of that other language, and you just even if you can't understand the words, you'll probably be able to hear the meter, right? You'll be able to hear what how the stresses fall. Um, just certain Middle Eastern languages, for example, the accent almost always falls on the final syllable of the word, which gives
Huh.
it a totally different meter, right? So
It would, yeah.
yeah,
Like a lot of finality. It's true that when
that's
you listen to different languages, they have a different rhythm. It's one of those
that's
things
right.
that gives different languages their characteristics. Now, with
Yeah,
iambic pentameter, because it's meant to replicate the natural speaking pattern of an English, I'm assuming that that means it would make it uniquely well suited to be performed out loud as opposed to written, to read.
I mean, Shakespeare thought that. um,
Mm.
I mean, his much of his poetry is actually in his plays, and you'll see that most of the plays are written in rhyming couplets. So the people are speaking. Actually, this reminds me. I have a friend who is francophone by birth, but totally fluent in English, and she says she really prefers listening to Shakespeare in French because I
What?
think that the translations are into modern French, whereas the English she finds too archaic for her to be able to comfortably understand, since English is her second language. And I think
Huh.
and she's an actor too, by the way. So I find that quite interesting that we have a certain degree of comfort, even though for people in Shakespeare's time, what they were listening to was almost common parlance. It was that was how people spoke. They didn't always rhyme, but he could play.
Yeah,
I don't
did you know
sing
people back in the day used to rhyme every
all the
second
time.
line?
Yeah,
Yeah, they just rhymed. That's just how
they
people
just do.
spoke. But
Yeah,
I know that English as a language has evolved and morphed a lot more than the French language has, because there is literally an institution of the French language in France that polices the use of the language. And
that's
because
right.
of that, it stayed basically the French that was spoken in like the 1700s is almost identical to the French spoken in French nowadays.
I
Although
think
the
there are
accents
kids.
have changed, but
Yeah.
the popular words haven't.
Well, there are a bunch
Mhm.
of, loan words like, weekend and, things that have come into French from English and many other languages too. So,
Yeah,
and
it's pretty famous in France, so there's lots of Anglicisms that have
yeah,
snuck their way in
that's right.
there.
But, language
Mhm,
evolves. All languages
mhm.
evolve, and,
As much as the French institution would like,
doesn't like
to,
it. And,
doesn't like it.
I have a friend who has a coffee mug that says on it, "I am silently correcting your grammar." And
Mm.
that's close to my heart because I am a grammarian at heart, an editor at heart, and as you know, record books for PAL reading for people with vision impairment or text challenges. And one of the big challenges for me is that our purpose is to read the text as it is written and not to vary from the text as it is written. Well, if you read a book that hasn't been well edited, the temptation to correct the grammar is overwhelming. And I'm finding sometimes I'm reading a book out loud, and I love reading poetry. I have to say I love that. But and I have to go back and re-record something where I have inadvertently corrected the grammar or the diction or something like that. It's a challenge, you know.
It must be also a challenge to not just read things that are badly edited, but just things that are badly written in the
Oh
first
yes.
place, and that includes poetry, right? You must have read some bad poetry in the day.
Terrible. Yes, in honor of bad poetry, I have to mention the man who is acknowledged as the worst poet in the English language.
What an
Uh,
accolade.
isn't that, yeah? He wonderful, a Scottish poet called William McGonagall, and I have to say that there's very little poetry quite as bad as his. In fact, he never stopped performing his poetry. He believed that it had to be recited out loud, and people hated it so much that they threw vegetables at him when he was reciting his poetry. So he would typically show up at his readings with an umbrella because he knew that those
Came
rotten veg.
prepared.
Yeah,
He
he
was
came prepared.
self-aware.
Oh, well, no, I don't think he was en self-aware enough. If you
Well, if he
were,
brought the umbrella,
yeah,
he knew he
yeah,
was gonna
he
get
he knew he
vegetables
was
hurled
gonna
at him.
get pelted, but it didn't
Yeah.
stop him. Oh, God. So, I'm very tempted here to read a poem of his that I find excruciating, and
We
it
would
is.
love to hear
Would you
it.
like that? Okay. It
Yes.
is called Robert Burns. Now, as you may know, Robert Burns is considered the best poet in Scotland, at least at that time. And so he wrote an ode to Robert Burns, which Robert Burns probably would have burned if he'd had a chance. Okay. Immortal Robert Burns of air, there's but few poets can with you compare. Some of your poems and songs are very fine. To marry in heaven is most sublime. And then again, in your cotter's Saturday night, your genius there does shine most bright, as pure as the dewdrops of night. Your Tam O'Shanter is very fine, both funny, racy, and divine. From John O'Groats to Dumfries, all critics consider it to be a masterpiece. And also, you have said the same, therefore they are not to blame. And in my own opinion, both you and they are right, for your genius there does sparkle bright, which I most solemnly declare to thee, immortal bard of air. Your banks and braes of bonny Doon is sweet and melodious in its tune, and the poetry is moral and sublime, and in my opinion, nothing can be more fine. Your Scots, wha hae we Wallace bled, is most beautiful to hear sung or read, for your genius there does shine as bright, like unto the stars of night. Immortal bard of air, I must conclude my muse to speak in praise of thee does not refuse, for you were a mighty poet, few could with you compare, and also an honor to Scotland, for your genius it is rare. Can you beat it? I mean, ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum,
How
ta-dum.
often does he use the word genius?
Yeah,
It
no kidding, right? Or fine repeatedly. And there's really, he will just stretch a sentence out until he grabs a rhyme out of nowhere and it doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense.
and you
Oh my
and
God.
there's some like similes that just don't really
That
work in the
doesn't work.
context. Like your
No.
genius shines bright.
Yeah,
What
no,
do you
yeah,
mean?
and for your genius, it is rare. I mean, oh, I love the way he lists, uh, Burns's poetry. The first 2 paragraphs just simply list the poems. It's like, "Oh, come on."
Yeah, I
Anyway,
think part of this is that he wrote a poem. Like, it was the topic of the poem that seems very unpoetic in the first place.
oh,
Right? And it's a
totally.
weird thing to write a poem about in the first place. Just write a listicle. Like you
Yeah,
don't just write
yeah.
an article. Don't write a poem. What are you doing?
Oh,
You-
well, I don't yeah, nothing stopped this man, he really he kept at it, and, uh, and I think people really enjoyed the fact that they knew it was gonna be horrible. They came armed with vegetables, and, yeah,
You know, it was a spectacle. It was
it
like the
was a
Minecraft
spectacle.
movie,
Oh.
just in 1880. He William McGonagall had another poem that I thought was really funny. I looked up what is his most infamous poem,
Oh,
and
is it
this is the
about
one
the
that came
coup?
up. It is the Tay Bridge disaster
Oh
from
gosh. Are you
1880.
going to read it?
I will going to read a portion of it. It's
Okay,
quite long and bad.
it's
Um,
terrifying.
so the Tay Bridge disaster was a bridge for trains, and it collapsed during a stormy night while a train was over it, and it led to a huge loss of life. And this poem was a lament for that event, and people thought it was quite gauche and unpoetic and kind of emotionally off. You'll see what I
Mhm.
mean. It was
Okay.
just a bit off-putting for the context, right? Beautiful railway bridge of the Silvery Tay. Alas, I am very sorry to say that 90 lives had been taken away on the last Sabbath day of 1879, which will be remembered for a very long time. 'Twas about 7 o'clock at night, and the wind it blew with all its might, and the rain came pouring down, and the dark clouds seemed to frown, and the demon of the air seemed to say, I'll blow down the bridge of Tay. So that's like the first
Oh.
quarter. Here are the last couple lines. These are the worst ones. Oh, faded bridge of the silvery Tay, I must now conclude my lay by telling the world fearlessly, without the least dismay, that your sensual girders would not have given away. At least many sensible men do say, had they been supported on each side with buttresses. At least many sensible men do say, for the stronger, for the stronger we our houses do build. That's actually how it's written. The less chance we have of being killed.
Oh, it's painful. But, I mean, it's sort of there's a very fine line between hysterically funny and absolutely
And
excruciating
kind of insulting.
and insulting. I know. It is. I mean, to the people who died, oh, it's terrifying. Ah,
Had
Jacob,
they
thank you
been
for sharing this
supported on many sides by
by
buttresses.
buttresses. Yes, so we need a little bit of architectural criticism with our poetry.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah.
But like just because it rhymes, it doesn't mean it's good. And something I
Or
always
it
look.
does yeah, or even a poem, just because it rhymes, that's not enough. That, if you look at all of those, meter, rhyme, scheme, and stanza, rhyme alone doesn't cut it, right?
Yeah, like the limerick that I wrote for the top of the show while I introduced you, like, sure, it rhymed, but it wasn't the most eloquent way to bring you in. I didn't even say your last name, right?
That's
McLaughlin.
what that's my last name.
That is your last name. So, um, I did write some more poetry because you wanted me
Ah,
to do so,
I did.
and I would love to share it with you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I want to talk you through like my writing process for it too.
Okay.
Um, oh, I forgot I wrote a haiku. Okay, I think I wrote this one in 10 seconds. Dancing in my house, I stubbed my toe and it hurt. Fetch the frozen peas.
I
Now,
like that.
this is kind of the same thing as the William McGonagall poem, where it's like it's not something that's worth writing a poem about, but because it's a haiku, at least doesn't feel like a waste of time.
I don't know. I kind of like it. I think that it has most of the elements, including the surprise.
Although I think you told me last time around that haikus are very often seasonally based, right? Is that a requirement?
It's not a requirement. In fact, I don't like the idea that poetry has any requirement. But
Mm.
I mean, for the traditional Japanese poetry was seasonally based, and you could tell by the poem which season it was either written in or it was, an ode to. So yeah, it often is.
Oh, okay,
But
okay.
there's every sort of haiku now. Anything you like.
What are the biggest challenges for any kind of creative, it doesn't matter if it's poetry or music or anything, is finding a topic to create around? Um, Poetry is kind of unique because you can write a poem about absolutely anything, an object, a feeling, an event, something very abstract, like anxiety. You can write about absolutely anything. Um, because I know you've written poetry in the past, you have published poetry. How do you remember your process for like finding out what you wanted to write about?
That's an interesting question. I'm often struck by an emotion or sometimes a sound, and the words together will make a sound. I recently read a poem called "4 in the Morning." I didn't write it. It's a well-known poem, um, that I thought was so evocative of how one feels when one does not want to be awake at 4 o'clock in the morning, and
Mm.
yet one is. And yeah,
It's finding
you
the
know,
right words to describe something undescribable.
yeah,
Mm.
that's right. And I can't think of another way of expressing that particular feeling, of the poem. I won't read it to you, but the poem, the wish that you could have just slept another hour until there was the faintest streak of dawn. It's so dark at 4 o'clock in the morning, and just that feeling of, it's a sort of a balance between hopelessness and hopefulness, and I think about, if you can take a feeling that's strong and find the words to go with it, or to express it, on your way. Like stubbing your toe, Jacob. Yeah, I mean, that's a strong emotion. It hurts like anything, and that you can turn it into a poem is a gift. I think some people would just sit down and cry, but you had the foresight to turn it into a poem. I love it.
A lot of writing, especially like nonfiction writing, is meant to just make you understand, to
Mm.
have a message and just convey it. Um, non fiction, but especially poetry, to me is about feeling the sentiment, being put there, like having the emotion put onto you. And if it's well done, um, you really relate to that feeling of being up at 4 a.m. when you don't want to.
Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Now, um, one of the things that I sent to you and to Ramya, and I'm wondering if you want to discuss it, is the question: is there such a thing as a happy poem? And many people believe that poetry, uh, even where the initial expression is something pleasurable, hides within it a kind of melancholy. Do you agree with that?
You know, this reminds me of something you often hear about artists, and that like it's kind of impossible to be an artist unless you've had a hard life, unless you've lived difficult moments, challenges. Um, and the only thing worth writing about is your challenges, right? And the beauty that you have in your life is only beautiful because you've seen it in contrast to the bad things that you've gone through. And this actually goes with the quote that I read at the top of the show from Ernest
Hmm.
Hemingway: "Write hard and clear about what hurts."
Yes.
That couldn't be more fitting here, right? But you know what it is? I feel like sad poetry just hits harder than happy poetry, because happy poetry feels childish, or at least it feels a little like a little like a sickly sweet in a way. I feel like most people write about things that are sad. It feels like most of the poetry we've read on here is sad.
Well, if
What's
we
your
have
take?
a moment. I'd like to read The Lake Isle of Innisfree by William Butler
Please.
Yeats, who
Yeah.
did not have a particularly hard life, as it turns out. And there
Hmm.
are people who said he wasn't even very smart, but he was a brilliant poet. And this is the poem that I would challenge you and our listeners to decide if it's a happy poem or not. The
Okay.
Lake Isle of Innisfree. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the crickets sing. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always, night and day, I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway, or on the pavement's gray, I hear it in the deep heart's core.
To
And
me, that's not sad at all. It sounds like
okay.
somebody at peace. It sounds like somebody who's where he wants to be. There are some words in there that kind of evoke negativity, like a small shack and the pavement being gray. But
See,
other
yeah,
than
and
that,
I hear he's not there. He will arise and go now. Because the feeling that I have is that he's seeking peace, but he doesn't have it. He knows where he thinks he can find it,
well, he's going,
but
right?
he says, well, he says he will.
Well, has he
Um,
found it? It sounds
well,
he
he's
speaks with a
stand.
lot of definitiveness, though. He
He
seems
says
pretty
he's
confident that he's gonna
standing
get
on
there.
the roadway or on the pavement's gray, and he's hearing this peace in his deep heart's core. But does he actually have it? That's my question about this poem. So, my
Mm,
husband and I argue about this fairly regularly. He agrees with you. He thinks it's a very happy poem. And he particularly likes when we have flowers in our garden that attract honeybees. And he can hear them in the bee loud glade. And he thinks of this poem and thinks that this is wonderful
hmm.
and peaceful. And I think it's a poem of longing. So, yeah, I mean, longing isn't necessarily a negative thing, but I don't hear it as
Right.
entirely happy, right?
Wanting is
Yes.
not negative
No.
inherently, just because it's someone seeking peace. Hey, it would
Yes.
be negative if it was someone seeking chaos, right? Like, I think it's a
Yes,
good
well,
thing to seek peace. That is,
no, we have
you are at
plenty
peace
of
if you are
chaos,
seeking
thank
peace.
you.
Indeed. As we wrap up here, Danielle, I wrote one more poem in the
Oh, good.
spirit of that Ernest Hemingway quote. Write hard and clear about what hurts. And what hurt recently was that I screwed up a cake pretty badly. And I wrote a poem about it. This poem is called Disappointment. My cake, it's ruined. Was the flour not milled right? Were the dates old or unripe? They say time you enjoy wasting isn't wasted at all, but there's egg stuck on the kitchen wall, and all I have to show for it is a barely edible, chemically unstable sludge of wet sugar in a greased pan. Time I will never get back. 45 minutes at 350 spent, tossed away in unresolved anticipation. I scrape the egg off the wall in resignation, cleaning the counters, the bowls, the whisk, with a sweet tooth left unsatiated. The apple I eat instead is no substitution for the cake I envisioned, and neither was the couscous when flour was what I needed.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, that could be a problem. I really like that poem, Jacob, and, I'm going to make sure that the couscous and the flour are kept very separate from one another in my cupboard.
They were similar looking bags. What can I
Yeah.
say?
Oh, isn't that
That's blind
funny?
cooking for you. I also forgot to put cocoa and brownies once.
Oh, well,
That
yeah,
was a plain cake.
pretty plain. Oh, that's wonderful. Well,
Very
thank you
plain.
for sharing that. You definitely have a gift here. I think you need to keep working on it.
It's because I want to impress you. I worked really hard on that.
And you succeeded. I'm
You've
completely
inspired me.
impressed.
It's always fun having you. Maybe we'll do a part 3 for poetry if
Oh, you
we
never
can dig
know.
deeper on this. You're the best,
That's
Danielle. Have a
lovely.
good one.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Take care
Of
now.
course. That
Bye.
was Danielle McLaughlin. She's a regular contributor to this show. And that's all the time we have for this edition of AMI Audiobook Review. The show airs weekends at 1 p.m. Eastern on AMI Audio and repeats every 6 hours on the channel. We're also available on all the big podcast platforms, and that includes YouTube. You can email us at audiobookreview@ami.ca. That's audiobookreview@ami.ca. We really appreciate your feedback. And you can also follow us on Instagram at AMI Audiobook Review. That's at AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Szymanski. Happy listening.